While I was on a business trip in Japan, my husband called me and said, "Come home and sign the divorce papers. My mistress is pregnant. I've sold the house, sold the cars, and I'm going to marry her." I simply replied, "Okay." 3 days later, I returned home. The moment I walked out of the airport, I saw him waiting for me. As soon as he saw me, he charged toward me like a madman and shouted, "What the bloody hell did you do?" The first thing people usually ask me is whether I cried after that phone call. The answer is no. Not because I was strong, not because I wasn't hurt. I simply didn't have enough time to process what had happened. One moment, I had been standing in a hotel room overlooking Tokyo Bay, reviewing presentation notes for a meeting scheduled the next morning. The next, my husband of 12 years was calmly informing me that he had gotten another woman pregnant, sold our house, sold our vehicles, and expected me to fly home and sign divorce papers. Shock is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive as tears. Sometimes it arrives as silence. I remember staring through the floor-to-ceiling window of my hotel room while the city lights reflected across the water. My phone was still pressed against my ear. "Giles," I finally said, "what are you talking about?" His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. "I'm talking about reality, Rowena." "Reality?" The word made my stomach twist. "We've been over for a long time. You just refuse to see it." I closed my eyes. 12 years. 12 years reduced to a few cold sentences. "And your mistress?" I asked. "Her name is Cressida." The way he said her name told me everything. No guilt, no shame, only pride. "She's pregnant," he continued. "We're starting a family." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My husband knew how badly I had wanted children. He knew every fertility appointment, every failed treatment. Every night, I cried when another test came back negative. Yet, there he was, delivering the news like a victory speech. I leaned against the desk. "What exactly do you mean you've sold the house?" "I mean, I sold it. You can't sell a house by yourself." A short laugh escaped him. "Apparently I can." Then he started listing details. The estate agent, the completion date, the buyers, the moving arrangements, specific information, too specific to be a bluff. A knot formed in my chest. "What about the cars?" "Sold." "Giles, look. Rowena, don't make this difficult. Just come home and sign the paperwork." There was a pause. Then he delivered the line that finally changed everything. "I'll make sure you get something out of it." Something as if he were discussing a business transaction. As if the life we had built together could be reduced to a consolation prize. I looked out at the water again. The hurt was there. The betrayal was there. But beneath both emotions, something else was beginning to emerge. Confusion. Because none of what he was saying made sense. Not legally, not financially, not practically. There were too many obstacles, too many signatures, too many approvals, too many protections. Unless Giles believed something that wasn't true. My voice became very calm. "Okay." He stopped talking. "What?" I said. "Okay." The silence on his end lasted several seconds. I don't think that was the reaction he expected. No screaming, no begging, no threats, just one word. "Okay." Finally, he cleared his throat. "Good." Then he hung up. I stood motionless for nearly a minute. The city below continued moving as though nothing had happened. Cars flowed through intersections. Neon signs glowed. People walked sidewalks. Meanwhile, my entire marriage had just exploded. A few minutes later, I called the only person I trusted to help me understand what was happening. My solicitor. Her name was Blythe Lawson. We'd known each other for years. Blythe answered on the second ring. "Rowena, it's after midnight in London. Is everything okay?" "No." The single word was enough. Within seconds, she was fully awake. I told her everything, every detail, every claim, every accusation. When I finished, she remained silent for several moments. Then she asked one question. "Did you authorize any of these transactions?" "No." "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did you give Giles power of attorney?" "No." Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she spoke. "Then Giles has a very serious problem." I sat down slowly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if what you're telling me is accurate, there are multiple issues here." My heartbeat accelerated. Blythe wasn't someone who exaggerated. Ever. "Rowena, where are the trust documents? in storage and digitally archived. Good. What are you thinking? She exhaled. I'm thinking your husband may not fully understand who owns what. The statement sounded strange because from the outside, Giles appeared to own everything. Everyone thought so. The company, the properties, the luxury vehicles, the investments. Even many of our friends assumed I simply enjoyed the benefits of Giles's success. Few people knew the full story. That had been intentional. Years earlier, after my father died, I inherited a significant trust. Nothing extravagant by billionaire standards, but enough to create security for generations. When Giles launched his company, that trust became the foundation that allowed him to survive difficult years. My father had believed in him. I had believed in him. We invested. We guaranteed loans. We provided capital. Without those resources, the company would never have survived its first 3 years. But Giles hated discussing that. As the company grew, he preferred the narrative that he had built everything himself. Eventually, everyone accepted it, including apparently Giles. Blythe's voice pulled me back. I want copies of every document we have. You think he's lying? I think he may have done something incredibly reckless. I rubbed my forehead. A headache was forming. Outside, Tokyo glittered beneath the night sky. Inside, my life was unraveling. When's your flight home? I'm changing it tonight. Good. Then Blythe's tone softened. Rowena, yeah, I'm sorry. Those 2 words nearly broke me because unlike Giles, she sounded sincere. For the first time that evening, tears threatened to surface. I swallowed them. I'll be okay. You don't have to be okay tonight. After we ended the call, I sat alone for nearly an hour. I thought about my father. I thought about the younger version of Giles. The man who used to bring me coffee while I worked late. The man who once drove 6 hours during a snowstorm because he missed me. The man I had loved. Somewhere along the way, that man had disappeared. And I hadn't noticed until it was too late. Around 2:00 the morning, I opened my laptop. An email notification appeared. It was from Blythe. Attached were several requests for documents and authorizations. At the bottom was a brief note. Get home safely. We'll handle the rest. I stared at the sentence. We'll handle the rest. For the first time since Giles's call, I felt something resembling stability. Not hope. Not yet, but certainty. The next morning, after finishing the business obligations that had brought me to Japan, I booked the earliest flight home. As I packed my suitcase that night, a question kept repeating in my mind. If Giles truly believed everything belonged to him, had he ever bothered to learn whose name was actually behind it all? The flight from Tokyo to London is long enough to force a person to sit with uncomfortable thoughts. There is nowhere to go. No distractions that last. No meetings, no errands, no excuses. Just hours suspended above the world while your mind revisits memories you once trusted. I spent most of that flight staring out the window. The clouds below looked peaceful. My life did not. A few months earlier, if someone had asked me whether my marriage was perfect, I would have laughed. No marriage is perfect. But I would have said it was solid, stable, worth protecting. Now I wasn't sure how much of it had been real. The hardest part wasn't Giles's affair. Not yet. The hardest part was realizing that the man I thought I knew might never have existed in the way I imagined. As the aircraft crossed the time zones, I found myself thinking about how we had met. It was almost 15 years earlier. I was 29. Giles was 31. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't influential. He wasn't the polished executive people would later admire. He was ambitious, determined, funny, and completely broke. We met at a charity fundraiser in Edinburgh. I remember his suit didn't fit properly. His tie was crooked. His confidence was far larger than his bank account. He spent half the evening talking about a software platform he wanted to build. Most people ignored him. I didn't. There was something genuine about him back then, something hopeful. After the event ended, we stood outside talking for nearly an hour while snow drifted through the streetlights. When he finally asked for my number, I gave it to him. 3 years later, we were married. At the time, Giles's company was barely surviving. The startup world is full of people with great ideas. Most fail. Giles was no exception. For 2 straight years, the company lost money. Investors walked away. Clients disappeared. Several employees quit. There were nights when Giles sat at our kitchen table with his head in his hands, convinced everything was over. That's when my father stepped in. My father had built a successful logistics company decades earlier. He understood business. He also understood people. After reviewing Giles's proposal, he agreed to help. Not because he thought the company was guaranteed to succeed, because he believed Giles deserved a chance. That chance changed everything. Funding arrived. Loans were secured. Operations stabilized. The company survived. Then it grew. Then it exploded. Within 5 years, Giles was being interviewed by business magazines. Within 7, he was speaking at conferences. Within 10, people referred to him as a self-made entrepreneur. Every time I heard that phrase, I smiled politely. Self-made. The truth was more complicated. But I never corrected anyone, neither did my father, neither did Giles. At least not in the beginning. The first signs of change were subtle. Success rarely corrupts people overnight. It happens gradually. A compliment here, an award there, a magazine cover, an interview, a standing ovation. Then suddenly everyone starts telling you how brilliant you are. After hearing it long enough, some people begin believing they achieved everything alone. Giles was one of those people. The humility that once attracted me started disappearing. He became impatient, dismissive, arrogant, especially toward people he considered less successful, including me. I remember one dinner party in particular. A guest asked how Giles's company survived the difficult early years. Before I could answer, Giles smiled. A lot of hard work. Everyone laughed. The conversation moved on, but I noticed something. For the first time, he hadn't mentioned my father. Not once. Later that night, I brought it up. His response was immediate. "Rowena, do we really need to keep talking about your family's money?" The comment surprised me. My family's money kept the company alive. I know, then why pretend otherwise? His jaw tightened. Because people don't respect handouts. The word hit me harder than he realized. Handouts. That was how he viewed the support that had saved his business. I should have recognized the warning sign. Instead, I made excuses. Marriage encourages excuses. You tell yourself your spouse is stressed, busy, distracted. You convince yourself temporary behavior doesn't represent permanent character. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. By the time my father passed away 4 years later, Giles's transformation was undeniable. He wasn't cruel, not openly. He simply stopped valuing the people who helped him get where he was, including me. The cabin lights dimmed as passengers around me slept. I couldn't. Too many memories kept surfacing, like the business conferences that suddenly required extra days, the unexplained credit card charges, the late-night text messages, the passwords that changed without explanation, the growing emotional distance. Deep down, I think I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to face it. Then there was Cressida. At the time, I didn't know her name, only her existence. The first clue appeared almost a year earlier. A restaurant charge in Marbella. 2 dinners, 2 people, a hotel stay that extended beyond Giles's scheduled event. When I asked about it, he dismissed my concerns. "You're imagining things." I wanted to believe him, so I did for a while. Looking back now, I realize how many opportunities he had to stop, how many opportunities he had to tell the truth. Instead, he kept digging deeper and deeper. The vibration of my phone interrupted my thoughts. An email had arrived from Blythe. I opened it immediately. The message was brief. Too brief, that worried me. "Rowena, we've started reviewing preliminary records. There are issues. Call me when you land." Blythe, issues. The word seemed deliberately chosen. I replied immediately. "What kind of issues?" Her response arrived 20 minutes later. My stomach tightened as I read it. Possible unauthorized signatures. Questionable transfers. Need to discuss in person. I read the message twice, then 3 times. Unauthorized signatures. Questionable transfers. Those weren't divorce problems. Those were legal problems. Serious ones. For the first time, I wondered whether Giles understood what he had actually done. Had he become so convinced of his own importance that he stopped distinguishing between what was his and what wasn't? The answer seemed obvious. Yes. The rest of the flight passed slowly. By the time we landed in London, my emotions had changed. I was still hurt, still angry, still grieving the marriage I thought I had. But another feeling had emerged. Clarity. Because the more facts I gathered, the less this situation resembled a husband leaving his wife. It looked increasingly like a man who believed rules no longer applied to him. A man who had spent years taking credit for sacrifices he never made. A man who finally convinced himself that everything around him existed solely because of his brilliance. And men like that often make catastrophic mistakes. As passengers stood and retrieved luggage, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Blythe. Only one sentence, but it changed everything. We've only reviewed the first batch of documents, and Giles may be facing far more than a divorce. I stared at the screen. Around me, travelers hurried toward connections, reunions, and ordinary lives. Meanwhile, somewhere in England, my husband was probably celebrating his future. He thought he'd won. He thought the house was his, the cars were his, the company was his, the money was his. What he didn't realize was that the people reviewing his paperwork weren't looking at a marriage anymore. They were looking at a trail, and trails have a way of leading somewhere. By the time I landed in London, Giles had already been living through the first stage of a nightmare he didn't yet understand. I wouldn't learn the full details until later. Some came from Blythe, some came from company records. Some came from people who had witnessed his unraveling firsthand. When those pieces were finally assembled, the picture was astonishing. Everything started the morning after his phone call. While Giles was celebrating his new future, Blythe and her legal team were working from a conference room in Mayfair. They had spent most of the night reviewing documents. By sunrise, they had identified enough concerns to act. The first target was the house. Our home sat on nearly 3 acres outside Ascot, Berkshire. It wasn't a mansion in the celebrity sense. It was something better. A beautiful property filled with memories. The kind of home people build a life in. The kind of home where they expect to grow old together. The kind of home Giles had apparently sold without hesitation. At 8:30 that morning, Blythe filed an emergency notice disputing the transaction. By noon, solicitors representing the buyers had been contacted. By evening, questions were already being raised. Questions Giles could not answer. The second target was the vehicle sale, the luxury SUV, the classic convertible Giles loved showing off, the company-owned executive saloon. All 3 transactions suddenly attracted scrutiny. Ownership records didn't match Giles's assumptions. Neither did authorization requirements. Then things became much worse. Because the solicitors weren't simply reviewing assets, they were reviewing signatures. Blythe called me while I was waiting for my connecting flight. "Rowena, I need you to answer something honestly." "Okay. When was the last time you electronically signed company documents?" I thought for a moment. "Months ago." That's what I expected. My heartbeat accelerated. "What did you find?" A brief silence. "Then we found several signatures that appear to have been generated using your credentials." I felt cold. "Generated?" "Yes. Are they mine?" "No." I closed my eyes. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak because I knew exactly what she was implying. Someone had accessed my credentials. Someone had signed documents pretending to be me. Someone had done it repeatedly. And there was only one person who could have done that. Giles. Blythe's voice softened. "Rowena, I know this is difficult." "No." My voice sounded strangely calm. "It isn't difficult anymore because something inside me had finally broken free. The doubt, the denial, the hope that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. That hope was gone. The man I married might have cheated. But the man Blythe was describing had gone much further. He had crossed lines that couldn't be explained away. When my connecting flight finally departed, I spent most of it staring at legal summaries Blythe had sent. The deeper they looked, the worse things became. Several large transfers had occurred during the previous year. Corporate funds had been used for expenses with no obvious business purpose. Luxury travel, high-end restaurants, designer purchases, flat payments. At first glance, the amount seemed small relative to company revenue, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was the pattern. The money wasn't being spent on clients. It wasn't being spent on operations. It was being spent on Cressida. Meanwhile, back in Berkshire, Giles remained completely unaware of the storm approaching him, at least initially. According to later testimony from company executives, his first hint came on Tuesday morning. He arrived at headquarters around 7:30. The building occupied 3 floors of a modern glass office tower. Giles loved that office. Loved walking through the lobby, loved seeing employees greet him, loved feeling important. That morning, he approached the security gate and scanned his badge. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Confused, he frowned and looked at the receptionist. There must be a mistake. The receptionist looked uncomfortable. A security supervisor appeared moments later. Giles, can we talk for a minute? People noticed. Employees stopped working. Conversations quieted. Within 15 minutes, Giles learned something he never imagined possible. The board had suspended his executive authority pending review. His company email was disabled. His system access was revoked. His financial approval privileges were frozen. He was no longer permitted to make decisions on behalf of the company. The reports describe his reaction as disbelief, not anger. Not immediately. Disbelief. Because Giles genuinely thought he owned the company. He had spent so many years acting like the king that he forgot there was an actual ownership structure. A structure established long before the company became profitable. A structure tied directly to my family's trust. The board wasn't removing the owner. They were removing an employee. A highly paid employee. A powerful employee, but still an employee. By Tuesday afternoon, panic had begun replacing confidence. Giles started making calls. Lots of calls. Solicitors, board members, bank representatives, friends, anyone who might explain what was happening. The answers only made things worse. Then came Wednesday, the day everything collapsed. The forensic audit team began its review. Now, for people unfamiliar with corporate investigations, a forensic audit isn't a dramatic television event. Nobody kicks down doors. Nobody races through hallways carrying evidence boxes. Instead, experts quietly examine records. And records don't lie. Credit card statements, transfer logs, expense reports, digital signatures, email trails. Over time, patterns emerge. The patterns surrounding Giles were troubling, very troubling. By Wednesday afternoon, another unexpected problem appeared. Cressida, apparently, reality was finally reaching her too. One of Giles's former assistants later told me about a conversation she overheard. Cressida had called repeatedly throughout the day. At first, she sounded worried, then frustrated, then furious because the luxurious future Giles promised was beginning to disappear. The flat lease was under review. Certain accounts were frozen. Solicitors were contacting everyone. Nothing about the situation felt stable anymore. People reveal their true character during difficult times. Cressida was no exception. The woman who eagerly accepted Giles's gifts seemed far less enthusiastic when the gifts became uncertain. By Wednesday night, they were arguing constantly. By Thursday morning, she was no longer answering some of his calls. Meanwhile, I was finally preparing to return home. The final leg of my trip felt surreal. Somewhere below the clouds, my marriage was ending. My husband was unraveling. Investigators were reviewing years of records. And I still hadn't spoken to Giles since that first phone call. Part of me wondered whether I should. Another part knew there was nothing left to discuss. The facts were speaking for themselves. As the plane descended, my phone connected to the network. Several new messages arrived immediately. Most were from Blythe. One message contained a summary. I read it slowly. The board review had expanded. The audit was continuing. Multiple transactions were under investigation. Outside counsel had been retained. The phrase that caught my attention most appeared near the bottom. Potential personal liability remains under evaluation. Personal liability. In other words, consequences. Real consequences. The kind that don't disappear with excuses. The kind that follow people. The kind Giles never imagined would apply to him. When the aircraft touched down, I took a deep breath. I thought I was returning home to deal with a divorce. Instead, I was returning to something much larger. Because over the previous 72 hours, Giles's carefully constructed world had begun collapsing around him. And the worst part for him wasn't losing money. It wasn't losing power. It wasn't even losing the company. The worst part was finally discovering that actions have consequences, even for people who spend years believing they're untouchable. What I didn't know yet was that Giles had already reached his breaking point. And he was waiting for me at the airport. By the time my plane reached the gate, I had been awake for almost 20 hours. My body felt heavy. My mind felt numb. Yet, the moment I stepped into the terminal, every trace of exhaustion vanished because I saw Giles immediately. He was standing near the exit doors. At first, I barely recognized him. 3 days earlier, he had sounded confident, arrogant, victorious. Now, he looked like someone who hadn't slept in a week. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was pale. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. His hair looked disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through it for hours. Most shocking of all was the expression on his face. Fear. Pure fear. The kind people wear when the ground beneath them suddenly disappears. For a moment, neither of us moved. Passengers streamed around us. Families reunited. Business travelers rushed toward baggage reclaim. Life continued normally, but inside our small corner of the airport, everything felt suspended. Then Giles saw me and snapped. He started moving before I could react. Fast. Too fast. His cabin bag dropped from his hand and slammed onto the floor. People turned. Several travelers stepped aside. Giles. He reached me in seconds. What the bloody hell did you do? The words exploded from him. Heads turned instantly. A nearby security officer glanced in our direction. I stared at him calmly. Not because I felt calm, because I had already spent 3 days preparing myself for this moment. I didn't do anything. His eyes widened. Don't do that. Do what? Don't pretend you don't know what's happening. Several people slowed as they walked past. I hated public scenes. Always had. Giles knew that. Yet there he was, shouting in the middle of an airport terminal. His voice cracked. My bank accounts are frozen. I said nothing. The board suspended me. Still nothing. They've got solicitors everywhere. His breathing became uneven. They've locked me out of my own company. My own company. The phrase almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it perfectly captured the problem. Giles still didn't understand. Even now, even after everything, he still believed the company belonged to him. I adjusted the strap on my bag. Giles, lower your voice. No. His face twisted with frustration. No, you don't get to tell me what to do anymore. The irony was astonishing. For years, I had quietly supported his decisions. For years, I had tolerated his growing arrogance. For years, I had allowed him to believe he controlled everything. Now, he was discovering otherwise and he hated it. What did you tell them? He demanded. The truth. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The truth? Yes. What truth? I looked directly into his eyes. The truth that I didn't authorize those transactions. Silence. Not complete silence. Airports are never silent. But for a moment, Giles looked as though every sound around him had disappeared. Then he laughed. A sharp, desperate laugh. That's it? What do you mean? That's all you told them? Why is there more? The color drained from his face. A tiny reaction. Most people would have missed it. I didn't because guilty people often reveal themselves in small moments. Tiny pauses. Tiny expressions. Tiny mistakes. Giles. His jaw tightened. What? How many documents did you sign using my credentials? For the first time since arriving, he looked away. There it was. Confirmation. Not legal confirmation. Not courtroom confirmation, but emotional confirmation. The truth. The man couldn't even meet my eyes. I was handling business. No. My voice remained steady. You were pretending to be me. His nostrils flared. You never cared about the paperwork. That doesn't make it yours. People nearby were openly watching now. A security officer had moved closer, not intervening. Just observing, Giles noticed. His voice dropped slightly, but only slightly. You don't understand. Then explain. I built that company. The statement hung between us. For years, hearing those words would have made me angry. Now they simply made me sad because Giles genuinely believed them. He had repeated the story so many times that he no longer remembered reality. You built it? Yes. I nodded slowly. With whose money? His face hardened. Here we go. The conversation he had spent years avoiding. The company became successful because of me. That wasn't my question. Giles, with whose money? The answer never came because we both knew it. My father's. Mine, the trust, the loans, the guarantees, the safety net. Without those things, the company would have died long before success arrived. Yet, Giles had spent years acting as though none of it mattered. Years rewriting history, years taking credit. Now, history was correcting itself. I took a step closer, not aggressively, quietly. You know what the funniest part is? His eyes narrowed. What? I never wanted credit. He looked confused. I never cared who got the applause. My voice softened. I was proud of you. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt? Regret? Maybe both. Then it vanished, replaced by panic. You need to stop this. I almost smiled. The man who demanded a divorce 3 days earlier was now begging. Not directly, not yet. But the shift had begun. I can't stop anything. Of course you can, no. I shook my head. That's not how this works. His breathing quickened again. The solicitor said there could be investigations. I remained silent. They said there could be liability. Still silent, his voice cracked. They said I could be personally responsible. There it was. The real fear. Not the marriage, not me. Consequences. Actual consequences. For years, Giles believed consequences were things that happened to other people. Less powerful people. Less important people. Now, they were standing directly in front of him, and he had no idea what to do. A notification sounded from his phone. Then another. Then another. His face tightened. He ignored them. The phone rang. He ignored that too. Then it rang again and again. Finally, he glanced down. I watched the color disappear from his face completely. He answered immediately. What? Silence. His expression changed. Confusion. Shock. Then horror. No. Another pause. No, that's impossible. People around us faded into the background. Even I found myself watching because whatever he was hearing was clearly worse than everything that came before. His hands started trembling. No, don't do anything until I get there. Pause then. No, Cressida. Listen. Cressida. Of course. The call ended abruptly. He stared at the screen, then looked at me. For the first time since I arrived, the anger was gone. Only fear remained. Raw fear. The kind no amount of money can fix. She's leaving. I blinked. What, Cressida? His voice sounded hollow. She's leaving. I should have felt satisfaction. Maybe part of me did. A very small part, but mostly I felt exhausted because this wasn't about Cressida. It wasn't about another woman. It wasn't even about money. It was about character, and character always reveals itself eventually. I picked up my suitcase. Giles. He looked at me helplessly. The powerful managing director was gone. The confident husband was gone. The man who called me from a position of strength 3 days earlier was gone. All that remained was someone confronting the consequences of his own choices. I didn't do this to you. His eyes filled with disbelief. Then who did? I held his gaze. You did. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me I heard my name once, twice, 3 times. I didn't stop because for the first time in years, there was nothing left to explain. The truth had finally arrived, and it had arrived with a bill. The strange thing about consequences is that they rarely arrive all at once. People imagine dramatic moments, a single phone call, a courtroom verdict, a public collapse. Real life is usually slower than that, more methodical, more relentless. Consequences arrive in pieces, and each piece forces a person to confront a reality they spent years avoiding. For Giles, that process lasted months. For me, those same months became a period of healing I never expected. The morning after the airport confrontation, I woke up in the guest room of my sister's house in Buckinghamshire. The room was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. For several seconds, I forgot everything. Then reality returned. The affair, the divorce, the company, the investigations, the airport. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the familiar wave of grief. It came, but something else came with it. Relief, a small amount, barely noticeable, yet undeniably present. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering where Giles was. I wasn't questioning his excuses. I wasn't trying to hold together a marriage that only one person seemed interested in saving. The truth hurt, but uncertainty had hurt more. A week later, I officially moved into a temporary flat in central London. Nothing luxurious, nothing dramatic, just a comfortable place near Blythe's office while we dealt with legal matters. Friends kept asking the same question. Are you okay? I never knew how to answer. What does okay even mean after 12 years of marriage collapse? Some days I felt strong. Some days I cried while buying groceries. Some days I couldn't pass a restaurant without remembering a date Giles and I once shared. Healing wasn't linear. It never is. Meanwhile, Giles's situation continued deteriorating. The forensic auditors kept digging, the board kept reviewing records, the solicitors kept collecting evidence, and every week seemed to uncover something new. One afternoon, Blythe handed me a thick folder. We were sitting in a conference room overlooking the West End. The folder contained summaries from investigators, I glanced at the first page, then the second, then the third. By the fourth page, I closed it. I don't want to read anymore. Blythe nodded. You don't have to. What matters? She folded her hands. The pattern. What pattern? The fact that none of this appears accidental. That was the problem. One questionable expense might be a mistake. Two might be carelessness. Dozens spread over years told a different story. The investigators weren't discovering isolated incidents. They were discovering habits. Habits built on entitlement. Habits built on the assumption that nobody would ever look closely. For years, nobody had until now. A few weeks later, the first major lawsuit arrived. Not from me, not from the company, from the buyers of the house. They claimed significant damages resulting from the failed transaction. Their barristers argued they had relied on representations that turned out to be inaccurate. The case quickly became complicated and expensive. Very expensive. When Blythe informed me, she sounded almost sympathetic. He's facing problems from every direction now. I stared out the window. The city below buzzed with life. People rushing to meetings, tourists taking photographs, street vendors selling coffee, everyone carrying private struggles nobody else could see. Do you feel sorry for him? Blythe asked. The question surprised me. I thought carefully before answering. A little. She nodded slowly. That's probably healthy. Maybe, maybe not. The truth was complicated. I didn't miss the man Giles had become, but I missed the man he used to be. Those aren't the same person. And understanding that distinction took time. Several months after the airport incident, I encountered someone I hadn't expected to see, Cressida. The meeting happened completely by accident. I was leaving a restaurant near Covent Garden when I recognized her sitting alone at an outdoor table. She looked different than I imagined. Younger, nervous, ordinary, not the glamorous villain I had created in my mind. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Recognition appeared instantly, then embarrassment, then discomfort. I considered walking away. Instead, I nodded politely. Nothing more. No confrontation, no insults, no dramatic speech, just a nod. She looked stunned. Perhaps she expected hatred. Perhaps she deserved some. I don't know. But carrying hatred requires energy. And I was tired of giving energy to people who didn't value it. As I continued walking, I realized something important. Cressida wasn't the reason my marriage failed. She was a symptom. The real problem had been Giles's choices, his dishonesty, his arrogance, his willingness to betray people who trusted him. Another woman simply happened to be involved. That realization helped me let go of more anger than I expected. Giles, however, wasn't letting go of anything. Over the following months, he contacted me repeatedly. At first through solicitors, then through emails, then through mutual acquaintances. Most messages followed the same pattern. Requests, appeals, explanations, excuses. Eventually, one message stood out. It arrived late on a Tuesday evening. The subject line simply read, "Please." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was surprisingly short. Rowena, I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm asking for one meeting. Not about the marriage, not about getting back together. I just need to talk, Giles. I stared at the screen for several minutes. Then I closed it without responding because some conversations happened too late. Months earlier, I would have done anything to save our marriage. Months earlier, I would have listened. Months earlier, I would have fought for us. But those opportunities were gone, not because I destroyed them, because he did. The divorce proceedings continued. Settlement discussions moved forward. Financial reviews expanded. The process was exhausting. Yet, with every passing week, I felt stronger. Not because I won, because I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's approval. One evening, while visiting my mother's house, I found myself sitting on the back patio watching the sunset. The same patio where I used to sit with my father. The same view, the same trees, the same quiet peace. My mother joined me with 2 cups of tea. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she asked a simple question. Do you know what saved you? I smiled faintly. Blythe. She laughed. Besides Blythe. I thought for a moment. No. You never became like him. The answer caught me off guard. My mother looked toward the horizon. Bitterness changes people. I listened. It changes the person who caused the pain. Then she looked at me. But it also changes the person carrying it. I understood immediately because revenge had never really been the goal. Justice was. There is a difference. Justice creates accountability. Bitterness creates destruction. The distinction mattered. And somehow, despite everything, I had managed to hold on to it. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but enough. Enough to keep moving forward. Enough to rebuild. Enough to become someone stronger than the woman who answered a phone call in Tokyo months earlier. What I didn't know then was that one final chapter remained. One final conversation. And one final lesson Giles would learn too late. Nearly a year after Giles called me in Tokyo and announced the end of our marriage, the divorce was finally approaching its conclusion. By then, my life looked very different. Not perfect, not magically repaired, but stable, peaceful, honest. The flat in London had become a real home. I had returned to consulting work full-time, expanded several charitable projects my father once supported, and slowly rebuilt friendships that had been neglected during the final years of my marriage. The strangest part was realizing how much emotional energy I had spent managing Giles, not supporting him, managing him, his moods, his ego, his constant need for validation. Once that responsibility disappeared, I discovered just how much room existed in my life for everything else. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Blythe called. The settlement is finalized. I sat quietly for a moment. After everything that had happened, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt something simpler. Relief. That's it? I asked. That's it. I laughed softly. 12 years reduced to paperwork. Blythe chuckled. Most marriages end that way. How did Giles take it? The line grew quiet. Not well. That didn't surprise me. The previous year had transformed him. The lawsuits had continued. Several financial disputes had been resolved. Professional consequences had followed. The board permanently removed him from leadership. Industry relationships disappeared. Opportunities vanished. No dramatic prison sentence occurred. No television-style ending. Real life is rarely that theatrical. Instead, Giles faced something far more common: accountability. The kind that arrives one decision at a time, one consequence at a time, one lost opportunity at a time. His reputation suffered. His finances suffered. His credibility suffered. Most importantly, the image he spent years constructing finally collapsed. People learned the truth. Not because I launched a public campaign, not because I sought revenge through humiliation, because facts eventually surfaced. Facts have a way of doing that. A week after the settlement was finalized, I received another email. This time, I opened it immediately. Rowena, I know you ignored my last message. I understand why. This is the last time I'll ask for one conversation. Then I'll leave you alone forever. Giles. I stared at the screen. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I agreed. Perhaps I needed closure. Perhaps curiosity got the better of me. Or perhaps enough time had passed for the anger to loosen its grip. Whatever the reason, we arranged to meet at a small tea room in the Surrey countryside. Neutral ground, public, simple. The day arrived cold and gray. Winter was beginning to settle over the home counties. When I entered the cafe, Giles was already there. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Not because he looked older, though he did. Not because he looked tired, though he certainly did. It was something deeper. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. The arrogance that once filled every room had disappeared. He looked like a man who had finally stopped running from himself. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly, almost nervously. I sat across from him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. You look good, I smiled politely. Thank you. You seem happy. I am. The answer appeared to affect him more than I expected. Not because he wanted me miserable, because he finally realized I had survived. People who crave control often struggle when they discover others can move forward without them. The waitress arrived. We ordered coffee. Then silence returned. Eventually, Giles sighed. I spent months trying to figure out what happened. I waited. I kept telling myself someone set me up. His laugh was bitter. Then I blamed the solicitors. Another pause. Then I blamed you. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows. Inside, the cafe remained warm and quiet. What changed? I asked. He stared into his coffee. My therapist. That surprised me. He noticed. I know. A faint smile crossed his face. You probably never thought I'd see a therapist. No, I didn't either. For the first time that afternoon, genuine humor appeared between us. Small, brief, human. Then it faded. I kept telling him I was the victim. I remained silent. And one day, he asked me a question. Giles looked up. He asked me why every disaster in my life seemed connected to a decision I personally made. I couldn't help it. A short laugh escaped me. He laughed too. Not defensively, honestly. Yeah. He shook his head. That was pretty much my reaction. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. For the first time in years, Giles wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming Cressida. He wasn't blaming solicitors. He wasn't blaming me. He was simply telling the truth. And the truth sounded remarkably different from the stories he used to tell. I convinced myself I deserved everything. He stared at the table, the company, the attention, the money. His voice lowered. Even the affair. I felt sadness. Not because I wanted him back. That chapter was over. Because wasted potential is always sad. The younger Giles I once loved had possessed real talent, real kindness, real ambition. At some point, success convinced him those qualities were optional. That was his tragedy. Not the divorce, not the lawsuits, not the lost position, the loss of himself. Eventually, he looked at me. I'm sorry. The words hung between us. Simple, unpolished, late. Very late, yet sincere. And sincerity matters, even when it arrives years behind schedule. I nodded. I know. His eyes glistened. You do? Yes. Because surprisingly, I did. Not everyone who apologizes deserves forgiveness. But some people do. Not because their actions were acceptable. Because they finally understand them. There is a difference. After another few minutes, Giles asked the question I suspected had brought him there. Can you ever forgive me? I considered the question carefully. The answer mattered. Yes. His eyes widened. Then I continued. But forgiveness isn't trust. The hope on his face softened. And forgiveness isn't reconciliation. He nodded slowly. I think he already knew. I forgave you a while ago. Why? The answer came easily. Because carrying anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. He looked away. A tear slid down his cheek. Neither of us acknowledged it. Some things deserve privacy. Eventually, we stood. The conversation had reached its natural end. Outside the cafe, snow continued falling. The world felt quiet. Peaceful. Final. Giles extended his hand. For a second, I looked at it. Then I hugged him. Not because we were getting back together. Not because the past disappeared. Because despite everything, compassion remains valuable. Even when boundaries remained firm. When we stepped apart, he smiled sadly. Goodbye, Rowena. Goodbye, Giles. Then we walked in opposite directions, and that was the last time I ever saw him. As I drove home through the falling snow, I thought about everything that had happened. The phone call, the betrayal, the lies, the investigations, the airport, the consequences, the healing. People often think revenge is about destroying someone. I've learned something different. The most satisfying form of revenge is refusing to let someone else's betrayal destroy you. Justice matters, accountability matters, truth matters. But eventually, life becomes less about what happened to the person who hurt you and more about what happens next for you. Giles lost many things, some deservedly, some painfully, but he lost them because of choices he made. I didn't create those consequences. I simply refused to protect him from them. And that may be the most important lesson of all. When people build their lives on deception, the truth eventually sends the bill, no matter how long it takes. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen someone face the consequences of their own choices, or learned a difficult lesson about trust, forgiveness, or accountability? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about resilience, justice, and personal growth, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey.